Jennifer Napier-Pearce, editor of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Salt Lake Tribune. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Of course. You've been asking for about a year, so I put you off.
Finally.
Finally, we're here.
Finally, we get you in here. Now, the Salt Lake Tribune and Fox 13 News are content partners. Tell us, what does that mean, and what do your readers get out of it, and what do our viewers get out of it?
Well, you'll have to tell me what your viewers get out of it, but what our readers get is some firsthand, behind-the-scenes experiences from our reporters. We work in a print world, and they don't often get to express themselves verbally, and so to have that visual element is really, really great for us. I know that I've heard anecdotally our readers appreciate the partnership that we have with you. We also get to partner with you on some story ideas and exchange sourcing and that kind of thing. It makes, I think, both of our newsrooms much stronger.
Yes, and by way of letting you know, our viewers get the benefit of having an association with the Pulitzer Prize-winning staff at the Salt Lake Tribune, and so we're getting a lot out of this too. So thank you very much for being our partners.
Match made in heaven.
Now, because of the digital world, the print world and the broadcast world, or on-camera world, is starting, the lines between us are starting to blur. How difficult is that to deal with? How are you managing that?
Well, you know, we've had a very robust website at sltrib.com for, gosh, it's 20-plus years now, so we kind of understand this digital world a little bit. What we don't understand are visual needs. There's much more demand for video. That's where you come in and complement our work. I do think that reader attention is different now, and reader habits, consumer needs are much different, and they're changing rapidly. So to have that additional platform in addition to the print is really great for us.
Now, typically, print journalists are, I mean, I can see in my mind the green eye shade and the sleeve garters and the man whacking away at the typewriter or the lady whacking away at the typewriter. Things are different now in a digital world. You mentioned the journalism. How is journalism different now in a digital world as opposed to an actual print world?
Well, back in the day, print was very much according to a clock, and we had stiff deadlines at the end of the day, and it was rushed off to the printing press, and it mysteriously appeared on people's doorsteps in the morning. Now, the news is continuous. It's breaking all day long, and so we have a unique opportunity to post that as soon as we know it and to build on our reporting throughout the day. So in a lot of ways, consumers can see journalism in action, which I think is really exciting and valuable for the community.
Salt Lake Tribune isn't buying nearly as much newsprint as it used to in the olden days, because everything is online now, and there's a paywall up, and there is but the circulation is down for the print newspaper, and it's not just at the Tribune, it's all over the country. How are you managing that? How difficult is that to get through and maintain profitability?
In a lot of ways, I mean, we're operating two different businesses. One is digital. We are a digital information company, and the other is print. And we have seen a dramatic shift in where our audience is. Our audience online is degrees bigger than our print audience at this point. Consumer sensibilities have changed, the needs of consumers, they want their news right now, and so they've shifted to digital. What that means for our business, though, our business has traditionally been built on print advertising and on print circulation, subscriptions. And so both of those have sort of declined in tandem, and we are figuring out how we're going to survive, not in 10 years, but in 20 years and 50 years and beyond. I mean, we've been in this community since 1871. We're not going to go away. And our owner and publisher, Paul Huntsman, is very determined to give us a business model that will extend beyond the next generation.
In 2016, Salt Lake Tribune was bought by Paul Huntsman and his private equity firm from a hedge fund. Now the paper is, again, locally owned. What is the value of having a locally owned newspaper like the Tribune?
It's absolutely night and day. I can't even tell you the burden that has been lifted from the newsroom. Having somebody who spent a lot of his growing up time in Utah, who raises his family here, who understands our unique cultural diversity and our community's needs, to have a local owner who is invested in our institution is invaluable. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that when you have a national owner, they don't really care like what your news coverage is or how you do your business, the ethics that you portray to the community. It's really about the bottom line. And so it's refreshing, it's empowering to have a locally owned owner who's committed and invested in the community.
When you have an absentee owner, like a hedge fund, like you did before Paul Huntsman owned the paper, what does that do to the journalism itself?
Well, fortunately, our newsroom really tried to have an arm's length from the hedge fund. They didn't mess with our journalism, but they also didn't support it. And I came on to the paper as a reporter in 2013. By 2016, by the time of the Huntsman purchase, there had been 4 layoffs. So obviously, you know, the commitment is there for those who remain, but it's diminished because there are fewer people to do the work. It's really hard.
It's hard to envision the Salt Lake Tribune going away and going anywhere. A few moments ago you said it isn't going anywhere. But in fact, a third of the staff got laid off in 2018. What's going to happen? I mean, are we going to see continued layoffs as the business model changes?
God willing, no. Paul Huntsman has made a commitment to us to say he doesn't want to go through that ever again, and he's working very, very hard to find a sustainable business model. He's an entrepreneur, he's an excellent businessman. I have every conviction that he will be able to crack this nut, but it's not an easy place to be. I will just tell you, the Salt Lake Tribune has some unique constraints. We are not a national newspaper. We serve the community of Utah. Unlike the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are national, they have scale. They have audience that extends beyond borders. We really are committed to serving this community. So our business model is going to be different from the New York Times, from the Washington Post. It's also going to be a lot different from a tinier, self-contained community newspaper. So we're trying to find that middle ground. I'm convinced he's going to find it, and I'm convinced he's going to find it this year.
Now, the Salt Lake Tribune bills itself as Utah's independent voice since 1871, and you take great pride in that motto, I know. You're also competing against the Deseret News, which is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, headquartered here in Salt Lake City. Number one, how is the competition between those two newspapers, yours and the Deseret News? And number two, how do you explain the fact, given the demographics of Utah, that your circulation is larger than the Deseret News is?
I think people understand where they want their news to come from. They do want a degree of separation from power structures. Like it or not, the LDS Church has tremendous influence in the state. And I think competition is good. We compete with the Deseret News. However, because of strategic decisions on their part, they have decided to focus more on faith-promoting stories, family values kinds of coverage. The Tribune is not there. That is not our focus. We are an independent watchdog organization, and we always will be. Having said that, I do think that competition is healthy between us, and so we still want to get things first. We want to get it right. We want to be as thorough as possible. But we do realize that we can cover stories that they cannot simply because of their ownership, or we can cover it in a different way. And I do think that readers respond to that. Utahns want to have an outside voice, and that is something that we've been able to do for many, many decades, and hopefully in perpetuity.
In addition to the outstanding journalism at the Tribune, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism at the Tribune, you've also had some high-profile personalities start to come to the fore. I'm thinking of Robert Kirby and Ann Cannon and Gordon Monson and Robert Gerke and some of those folks, and there are others as well. how do you manage the journalism, the hard journalism side, with promoting these personalities? And you gotta, you either love or hate Robert Kirby, and he's been one of our guests here before, but how do you manage that in terms of being a serious journalistic entity?
I think newspapers traditionally have always had opinion voices that like to poke people. I would put Pat Bagley, our editorial cartoonist, in the same category. They are paid to be provocative, and they are paid to make you think, love him or hate him. Gordon Monson does the same with the sports crowd. I just think that there is a place for that kind of opinion, but we need to, as you probably do, we need to educate the public and just let them know the difference between independent watchdog journalism and entertainment and opinion. And there's a place for both at the Salt Lake Tribune.
Will the Salt Lake Tribune ever be available just online, not in print any longer?
I wish I could answer that. I think market forces are going to determine that. We are going to print as long as it's economically feasible to do so. I, for one, don't want it to go away. I love newsprint on my fingers. I love to look at the comics and then look at what else is happening in the community. There's just a different look and feel to the news in print, but I can't pretend that the economics are going to stay the way they always have been. That has not been what is happening in the last 4 or 5 years, and so I can't pretend that it'll be here for the rest of my life.
There is a small portion of the population here in Utah who remembers the days when the Salt Lake Tribune, well, they don't remember them because they weren't alive back then, but when the Salt Lake Tribune was early on, it was an anti-Mormon newspaper. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And there are some folks out there who still think that. What would you tell them?
Well, I love the foundation of independence, and I love the legacy that we have of separation from those in power. And as you know, and I know, traditionally the LDS Church has been a power broker in town, like it or not. So that continues. I will say Paul Huntsman is a practicing Mormon, and he doesn't shy away from that identity. I think that when he bought the paper, there was a lot of nervousness among people. Oh my goodness, a Mormon is going to be controlling the independent voice. And those fears were unfounded. I mean, I think if you look at the last 2.5 years since he's been the owner, there hasn't been a qualitative shift. He stays hands-off on the news. He does have influence on the opinion page, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But when it comes to the news, he really does stay hands-off.
Do you see Paul Huntsman, the owner of the paper, do you see him around very much at the paper?
I communicate with him daily. So he's very invested in the editorials that we write. I don't see him every day because he does a tremendous amount of travel as a business person, but he is always in contact through text or on email or on phone calls. I have constant communication with him.
Social media has exploded in our world. How has social media and the immediacy of it affected the journalism at newspapers like the Salt Lake Tribune?
Like TV, I mean, there's tremendous pressure to be first, isn't there? I mean, it's really hard because we live in a very competitive market, and I think that that's good in many ways. The check is, are we getting it right? And can we still get it right and still be first? So I do think that immediacy has its value, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And I have held stories, my team has held stories when we weren't quite ready to hit that publish button. We hope that our community understands that we want to get it right before we want to be first.
Yeah, and values that. You came to the Tribune in 2013 as a reporter. Now here in 2019, a short 6 years later, you are the editor. And some people would call it editor-in-chief. I mean, you're in charge there at the paper. Tell me about that meteoric rise and how comfortable you were with that.
Not at all. It was not anything that I ever aspired to do. Sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And when Paul assumed ownership, he was looking for advice. He wanted feedback. After an initial meeting, he offered me the job, and I was completely caught off guard. So I actually turned him down.
Did you really?
Several times. But at the end of the day, I can't think of a better team to work with, a mission that I believe in so much, and an owner who really has shown loyalty to the product. So as a journalist, I couldn't think of anything better, and there was no other reason for me to say no other than I was a little afraid.
What is the toughest part of your job as editor of the Salt Lake Tribune?
My biggest challenge right now is the budget and making sure that our journalism doesn't suffer, that our reporters, editors, the entire team feels very supported in the work. And that the community knows what goes into a story. I think there's a huge gap because we hear consistent messaging, even from the very top, about fake news and how there's you shouldn't trust the media anymore. And I just think we've got to combat that as journalists, tell people how we do the job, the multiple sources that we go through. We don't just publish things willy-nilly. It is a process that's vigorous, that requires a lot of thought and training, and we don't want to publish things that are false, you know? And so that has been something I've been quite pleased to go out and talk to people just about how news is produced and why we do it this way and why you should value it as a community.
Transparency seems to be the watch cry in just about every corner of our society now. How does transparency translate to the newspaper business and what you folks do?
You know, we have comment boards where we're interacting with people. We have letters to the editor, a time-honored tradition. We have open opinion pages, so if you want to spout off on the issue of the day, you are very, very welcome to do it, and we don't discriminate in any way, shape, or form. I do think that newspapers have had more of an arm's length relationship with the community. Since I've been editor, I've been trying to change that, getting out, sponsoring town halls, talking to classes and different groups in the community to make sure that people understand that the Tribune is not just a monolithic institution. It really belongs to the community, and we want feedback, good or bad.
Look into your crystal ball 20 years from now. What does the Salt Lake Tribune look like at that point?
Oh gosh, I see a committed team of journalists whose ethics are impeccable. I see a robust newsroom. I do see that the delivery system may have changed. I don't know if there will be a print product in 20 years. I think that would be optimistic to say. But however we deliver that, I would hope that people understand that the news ethical values and the professionalism that goes into our journalism remains the same, and it can be a trusted source of news.
Well, Jennifer Napier-Pearce, editor of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Salt Lake Tribune and content partner with Fox 13 News, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Bob, it was a great pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.